We saw this in Ohio, where science standards under debate in 2002 said that students should critically analyze evolution, which, after much back and forth, people basically came to say, okay, fine, that's perfectly fair. That's part of science, critical analysis. That was then used as sort of the thin edge of a wedge to put in a model curriculum that just echoed standard creationist claims that had no scientific basis. And so over the course of several elections, and this was in 2006 after the Dover trial and the $1 million judgment against the school district there, the Ohio Board of Education backed off of that. We also see this in Texas. In 2003, Texas is very influential because they're the biggest textbook market in the country. So, and they approve textbooks on the state level. So if they say we're not going to buy a textbook that does X, Y, and Z, the publishers jump. They don't really have any choice. And then the textbooks that your kids use in Kansas are going to be basically modified versions of those Texas textbooks. So whatever weird stuff that Texas wants in them is probably still going to be there. So they had a standard that was in all of their science standards that said students should learn the strengths and weaknesses of scientific evidence and information. Completely generic, pretty reasonable at the end of the day. In 2003, when they were approving science textbooks, they held hearing after hearing, and all anyone wanted to talk about was the strengths and weaknesses of evolution. This was something that applied to physics, it applied to all of biology. No one was talking about the strengths and weaknesses of cell theory. No one was talking about the strengths and weaknesses of gravity. It was evolution. So, when they were revising science standards last year, or earlier this year, the committee working on the standards tried to take that out, tried to put something in that was a little bit more reasonable. So they came up with the first part of this sentence, to which the Board of Education then just added this addendum, the "and" clause, which required students to examine all sides. Again, it seems reasonable, except that it's not restricted to scientific evidence. It's not putting any sort of qualifiers on there that says, this is a science class, we're talking about science. So does that mean that you have to bring in biblical creationism as one of the sides to this question? And given the board's history, not an unfair question. They also, instead of having this generic language about, let's just talk about the weaknesses and then argue about what that means when it comes time to adopt textbooks, they came up with specific weaknesses, or supposed weaknesses, that they stuck into the standards. So in Earth and Space Sciences, they wanted students to learn about differing theories about the origin of the universe, and differing theories about its history and age. In the biology standards, they wanted something that would emphasize the sudden appearance in the fossil record of different species. And yeah, it says sudden appearance, stasis, and sequential nature of groupings. But I was there in Texas, and all you heard for 3 days was, what kids need to learn about sudden appearance in the fossil record. So I think it's pretty clear where the agenda with that is headed. And if it's the same Board of Education when they do textbook adoption in 2011, 2012, they're going to come back to this and say, okay, your textbooks need to talk about sudden appearance. They're not going to worry about the rest of it. And there are other things. These are just some examples. A lot of these things start from mustard seeds. In Alabama, they've been introducing bills since 2004, unsuccessfully, that purport to protect academic freedom. This is a phrase that shows up in the Discovery Institute's SPANF. Don't try to read it. It's not going to work. But they're emphasizing here that that protecting the right of teachers to present alternative theories or points of view on the subject of biological or physical origins. They submitted that in 2004, and since then, these have proliferated through a sort of evolutionary tree here. So you've got the Alabama bills down here, submitted in the House and the Senate, again in 2005. And since then, there have been about 30 of these bills submitted in a dozen states or so. And they're going to show up again in state legislatures next year, I'm sure. One of them has passed thus far. We hope that we can hold it to that. The history here, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but emphasizing that this is about the rights of students and teachers to learn these alternatives and to put down on their tests. Well, yes, you taught me this, but I believe this, so that's what I'm going to put down on the test, and you can't grade me down. every time you say that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, I'm going to say it's 6. And you can't discipline me for doing that. It also draws in language from the Edwards decision that I quoted before. It draws in language from non-binding language in the conference report to the No Child Left Behind Act, something that is not binding law in any sense, but they pull that language in. The Discovery Institute picked it up as a model bill that they've been shopping around to different state legislatures. The other side of this draws from something called, in a parish policy in Louisiana. Louisiana has big French heritage. They don't have counties, they have parishes. So the parish school board had this policy on academic freedom to teach scientific evidence on controversial scientific subjects. The controversial subjects were evolution, origins of life, global warming, and cloning. Topics notable for being scientifically uncontroversial, but socially very controversial. And again, encouraging critical analysis, and encouraging teachers to teach the strengths and weaknesses of scientific theories, borrowing them from Texas again. That language merges with the Alabama version of the language, which shows up in New Mexico and Oklahoma. Clause, as do many of these bills, starting with the Discovery Institute model of language, that says, you can't construe this to promote any religious idea, which feels a little bit like protesting too much. If you have to say this isn't about religion, it probably is.